There's been a lot of interest in my fuel setup that I built for the engine side of the first generation Powerstroke 7.3. So what I've done is begun producing this thing on a fairly regular basis. A lot of guys approach me and ask if I have a kit available, and for the most part I do most of the time. So if you're interested, certainly shoot me an email, and I'd be more than happy to get one put together for you and sent off. Let's talk briefly about what the kit is and how it mounts on the motor and sort of the value add to it. The objective I came at this with was to try to make something that's quick, simple, clean installation without having to remove the turbo, without having to replace the fittings on the back of the head. That a lot of times is the challenge with doing the e-fuel setup on the engine, having to pull that turbo off there in order to get that driver's side fitting out in order to put something different in. So the goal here was to make it so you don't have to remove that turbo. What comes in the kit is everything you see pictured right now here on the table. These two lines right here is supply line in. This is the fuel supply line back. These two lines right here are coming off of the fuel block that I produce and go to the back of the head. One side, the silver side here, is AN fittings, and then the other side is Vibralock fittings. These go into the original fittings at the back of the head. These are produced with a mandrel bent program, so they're very consistent, come out perfect every single time. Also in the kit is the block itself. The block will be already screwed down to a plate. This mounts to the original 2 bolt holes for the fuel bowl, the fuel filter assembly that will get removed as part of the e-fuel configuration. The block itself, all machined up, ready to go for all the fittings that you'll need to add to it. The fittings you see in here will already be installed. These two go to the back of the head, driver side, passenger side. This is for the fuel supply coming in. This will be coming off your electric fuel pump wherever you choose to mount it. This is the fuel return back to the tank. Up here will go either your Schrader valve or a fuel pressure gauge, depending on what you want to put in there. And then the back here are the 2 fittings that we'll show in just a moment that also come off of your old system, and those are from the front of the head back into the fuel pressure regulator. There will be 2 new bolts that come with it. That's to mount it to the block. A new O-ring seal. This will be for the fuel pressure regulator component. Also in the kit will be a compression fitting. It's a 2-part fitting, 2 pieces. They'll already be together like this. This is a AN6 on this side. It's a male-female adapter here. It's the only thing that's available, a male thread for the compression fitting. And as well a plug to go into the old fuel pump hole when you remove the mechanical fuel pump off the engine. That's everything that comes in the kit. The things that you will be supplying from your old system is this collection of parts over here. You will reuse your 2 fittings that come off of your fuel pressure regulator on the back of your fuel bowl. You'll reuse your Schrader valve, again, or put a fuel gauge in there if you choose. The plug that holds in your spring here, and your valve body here, which is your fuel pressure regulator off your old system. With that small collection of parts is everything that you're going to need to convert the engine side for an e-fuel system. So let's go over to the engine and show how to take apart what's there and install the new system. All right, let's talk briefly about how to take this thing apart, and then we'll talk about how to put it together. The objective, again, is to be able to keep the turbo in place. So we want to have that sit there. You will need to take the Y collector out of the way. That frees up a lot of room in there to do what you need to do. Highly recommend putting some tape over the intakes before proceeding any further. As soon as you remove that intake, the next thing you should do is tape these guys up. Stuff a rag in there if you like, whatever it takes. You just don't want anything falling down into those intakes, especially a nut or a bolt as you pull this stuff apart. So the old fuel bowl will be the first thing that you pull out. You'll be disconnecting the hoses off the front or off the side regulator over there, unbolting it from the block. The old hoses, don't try to pull them off. You'll be wasting your time. Just get some clippers in there and clip those guys rather than trying to get the fittings and pulling the hoses loose. They're usually so dry rotted that they just don't have enough give or stretch in them anymore to come off of all the fittings that they're connected to. Once you've got all that loosened up, the fuel bowl will just come right up out of there. There will be some wires in some places where you're going to have to disconnect some things to get it out. This engine doesn't have much installed on it, so it looks more simple certainly than it's going to be when you're in there. But get the fuel bowl up out of the way. The old fuel pressure regulator is where you're stealing those parts from, the Schrader valve. The plug, the spring, and the valve body are up in here, and then you have the two brass fittings on the side over here, on the bottom over here is where you're scavenging those parts from. The fuel pump is a tricky guy to get out of there, or the thing that you want to be most careful about. First thing you got to do before you can even start trying to pull the pump out really is to get the banjo connection out of there with the two fittings that are on the back of the head, the fuel lines coming back here. So those will come off. The driver's side will come off. All right. There's the banjo bolt that's on the back. That's a 1 1/4 sized bolt. A wrench is usually what I see guys say they use. A lot of times they say they have to modify that wrench, give it a bend or so to get the banjo bolt loosened up, to get it out of there. The bolt's actually pretty big, pretty long. It screws out of there for a good long while. There it is right there. But you get that banjo bolt out, and then you'll have loosened up the old stock fuel lines. They will not come out as one whole piece here. They're stuck underneath the turbo. Even with the fuel pump pulled up out of the way, they still don't come up out of there without bending them or cutting them or just doing something to get them out of the way. Right now I'm going to just let them sit there. Let's talk briefly about pulling that pump up out of there. The danger, if you've read, for these fuel pumps, whether you're doing an e-fuel setup or just changing out the pump for a failed pump to put in a new one, is that plunger that drives the pump sits on top of the camshaft. That cam is in the cam lobe is in the downmost position. There's a good chance that when you pull that pump up out of there, this guy slips off the cam, falls down into your oil pan, and then you've got a really hard piece of metal hanging out down in there that you don't want. The trick, I'm told, is to have a helper turn the crank on the front pulley. It's 24 millimeter wrench to get up there, and turn that thing around until you see that pump pop up a little bit. If you see the pump sort of pop up just a little bit, you know the cam is pushed up on that plunger, and you're less likely to drop that plunger when you pull that pump up out of there. Another hassle with pulling the pumps, it's hard to just pull straight up on that sucker. A lot of times you have a tendency to try to pry up underneath the front. What ends up happening is that bottom piece snaps off right at the O-ring spot there. This chunk is left down in the block, and then you're struggling trying to get it out of there. Just be careful. Usually the plunger is still sitting right there, and you can grab that plunger with a pair of vice grips and then pull the remaining piece up out of there. So once you pull that up out of there, you're going to kind of look like this. I say kind of because I've already cut the supply line on this. What I did here was color code the two lines that are in here. Red is hot. Red is the supply line. That's the line that will be coming off the electric fuel pump. That's charged with your fuel pressure. The blue line is the soft line, the release line, the return line going back to the tank. So just made it blue. It just seemed more sensible that red is hot, blue is cold. One is charged, the other is not. To make the cut, you're going to use a small circular type cutoff wheel or cutoff tool. Something similar to this one right here. I cut this one a little bit shorter than I should have. Cut as close as the tool will let you out to that first bend in the tubing right there. So the cut should be more closer to this blue line. To make the cut a little bit easier to do, you can pull back the clip that's holding it in place right here at the front of the engine. That kind of frees the lines up a little bit, so you can pull this guy separate from the return line, get your cutoff wheel on there, make that cut. Once you've got yourself prepped to the point where you've pulled your fuel bowl and your pump and gotten your old fuel lines out of the way, you're ready to go ahead and put the new fuel block in there. So let's go ahead and do the quick assembly of it prior to putting it in the engine, and then we'll bring it over here and put it in the engine. Here we are back at the parts for the fuel system for the engine side. Again, this is how you're going to receive the fuel block, pre-configured with these fittings already in there. They have Teflon on them. The Teflon is petroleum rated. I suggest you use Teflon tape when you put your new fittings in there. Make sure that you're using something that is rated for petroleum fuels. The first thing you'll do, start with the brass fitting for the return lines off the front of the head. Put the top one in there first, and here's the reason why. You're going to spin that guy snug until, it's a pipe thread in there, until he's at the horizontal position here, facing towards the other two fittings that are already in there. He's going to be for the passenger side return. It's going to come kind of straight into it. Put the bottom one in there second, and the reason is you can see that flips in there pretty close to that first fitting. So spin him in. He's going to come around to about, the 1, maybe 2 o'clock position here or so. He's for the driver's side, is going to come in at that angle. Schrader valve, put him right in the top. Again, Teflon tape on the threads before you put him in there. Following that, your old plug for your fuel pressure regulator. Clean it up real good. There's going to be residue on there from the old O-ring. There's going to be a lot of green residue all the way around it. Clean those up. Clean everything up. That should go without saying. That you really need to clean things up real good before you start putting things back together. The valve body drops straight down into the fuel pressure relief area. It's just a little bit of a slight jiggle of the block, and it drops right in there. The spring right on top of it. There is a nipple on that plug. Want to make sure that goes right into the spring. And then you're going to tighten him in there. It's a 19 millimeter wrench that gets on this guy. Carefully trying to make sure I stay centered on that spring while I spin him in. 19 millimeter wrench. The plug will start to get tight as soon as that O-ring comes to the O-ring boss. And that's when you know you're getting a good seat in there. Get the 19 millimeter on it. Snug it down until the brass is making contact with the aluminum. Then you know that O-ring is pushed in there into the proper place. One more thing that I need you to assemble before you put this on the motor. I am going to correct this on future designs. This bottom fuel line in needs to get moved forward on the block. It's too much underneath this other fitting, so when you get this down into the engine, it's tough to get the 11/16 wrench onto this fitting and tighten things up. You got the engine right here, you got this fitting up here, you just can't get on it. So before you put it down into the engine, tighten this guy down real tight. It's the only one you need to do. My goal here is I was trying to leave enough room for this screw, this bolt right here, to be able to get down on it. So I'm going to do a little bit of configuration changes to make available room to get on this bolt, to bolt things in, second bolt here, and still be able to tighten this up while it's in the engine. You might need to take it loose sometime in the future for whatever reason, and it'll just be tough to do without pulling the whole block up out of there to do that. Once you've got that pre-assembled, you're ready to go over to the motor and start putting some of these other pieces together, so let's go do that. Okay, back over at the engine. First thing you're going to need to do is to put that freeze plug down into that hole where the fuel pump came up out of. Suggestions there: clean up around that hole. It's tough to clean up around it before you pull the pump out. There's just really no room underneath that pump to try to scoop dirt or anything out of there. There will be dirt. Clean the hole up real good. Get down in there with a rag, wipe it out. Use maybe some mineral spirits or something just to clean the surface enough, because what you're going to want to do is put just a little bit of RTV or something around this plug before you smack them down in there. So the cleaner the metal is, the cleaner the surface is down in there, the better you'll be able to get a seal with the new plug. When putting that plug down in there, you're going to use something like a socket. Is the easiest thing to get on there and use to pound it down into the block. This is a 1/2 inch on a 3/8 drive. It's kind of loose fitting on there, and that's what you want. This is the 9/16. It's a bit tight on there. There's virtually no wiggle room. You don't want that. When you pound that plug down in there, that plug is going to snug in all the sides, all the way around the whole circumference of that thing. They're going to squeeze inward, and they'll grab onto that socket, and you'll be stuck with a socket sticking up out of your block. So use a socket that's just a little bit looser going down in there. Just put that plug square down on top of that hole. See if we can have a look at this. And just get the socket on there. You can see you got just enough room with that turbo in place to be able to work that plug down in there. Pound it down until the plug is just below the surface of the metal down in there. Not too deep. Don't want to pound it down through the hole, obviously, but just below the surface. That allows the outermost edge of the plug to sort of have a grip on the metal, so of the hole, so it can't push back outward from the pressure inside the block. Once you've got him on there, next thing you're going to do is to put your compression fitting onto the steel line. Now, one thing I didn't mention, prior to cutting that steel line, again, I had already cut this prior to the video, so it's something that continually slips my mind. Before you make that cut, get some 220 grit sandpaper. Sand this line down really good in here. Get in there and just rub this whole straight, flat area down really good. Get it polished up as best you can. A compression fitting has a little metal ferrule in there, so it's a metal-on-metal surface contact. that has to be, clean surfaces, as clean and smooth as you can get them is what makes this seal up real tight on there. If that line is real rusty and pitted, you're not going to get a seal. If it's dirty, you're not going to get a seal. So again, get on there with some good 220 grit. The pipe itself is probably going to be in some pretty good shape. On top of these motors, they tend to have a lot of oil and grease all over everything, which protects the metals real well, so the lines tend not to be rusted up. Once you get them on there, it's 2 wrenches to tighten it down, one to just hold it still, the other to turn the nut to tighten down the ferrule. Again, if you cut this line just a little bit longer if you can, that'll put that AN fitting out past the blue line, and just a little bit easier to get the fitting on there for the supply line. So nonetheless, get him tightened up on there, and we're all set there. Next thing we're going to do is just come in with the steel lines first. Here's the reason why. It's a lot easier to wiggle these guys, especially the driver's side, into place while you have all the space in there that you have open right now. You'll have a high-pressure oil pump in there, which I don't have on this block, so your space is a little bit less, but it's not so much less that you can't wiggle these lines up in there quite easily. Again, with the old fittings that were in there, you had to bend them or cut them to get them out from underneath the turbo. The nice thing with this setup, they just wiggle right up in there. So there's the driver's side. What I'm going to do on this vibra lock back here is just give it a spin or two to get it started on the threads. Come in with the passenger side, same thing. It's obviously much easier to do. There's no wiggling it up underneath the tightness of that turbo in there. Once that is in there, we can take the pre-assembled fuel block, drop it down on the 2 holes that were for the fuel filter assembly. Take the 2 new bolts that come in the kit. Those will bolt you right on there real tight. These are a 15 millimeter socket that tighten those guys down. There's one, and there's the other. Right about here. Alright, there she goes. So that'll hold us still. I'm not going to tighten it down with a wrench, obviously, there's no sense. This is the supply line in. It's going to go off of your compression fitting on your supply line, your red line. Get on there, tighten him down. Again, it's 2 wrenches now, right? Because you got to hold that compression fitting still while you tighten this one down. Tighten him on there. You can put on your return lines from the front of the head, the passenger side. Goes on that one that we left sticking horizontal on the block. These fittings obviously are not tight. They're just set in there, but nonetheless, tighten that one in. The driver's side on the one that we faced up at about the 1 or 2 o'clock position. Tighten him on there. Now again, the high pressure oil pump will be in here, so you have a little less room to work. I've done this on my engine. There's plenty of room in there to get the wrench on it. Was one of my concerns that it was going to be too tight, but when I got over to the motor with it, turns out there was plenty of room to get the wrench on there. I had no problem tightening those fittings down. The only one that's a problem, again, is why I suggest to pre-assemble it, is that fuel line in at the fuel block. It's too tight. You can see, let's take a quick glance down in here. You can see how tight it would be to try to get a wrench onto that fitting down there between the block and the fitting that's just above it. So, hey, that's what these tests are for, right? Trial and error. I'll get it right on the next one. The return line, which is this guy right here, he's an AN fitting on top of the block right there, and then he's a band clamp going into the return line. The reason I used a band clamp here, this is low pressure return. There's no pressure here. This line just goes straight back to the tank. There's nothing restricting it unless you got a clog in there. So a band clamp is more than adequate. Everything else is a high pressure area of connection, so you want to use all those AN fittings in there that are meant for pressure. So after that, let's not neglect to put our AN fittings in there. If we were to neglect that, we'd have fuel shooting all over the top of the motor here. So we need to make sure to connect up the AN fittings that are supply lines to the back of the head. Get those on there. Then we'll come back with the wrenches. We'll tighten all the fittings down real tight. Don't forget the back of the head back here at the vibra locks. These are a rubber seal right there on the line, you can see. And all that does is go into a very slight chamfer in the fitting itself, and you just screw it down until that cap pretty much bottoms out against the fitting itself. That'll compress that rubber fitting real tight around the line, and that's what seals you up at the back of the head. The idea here is it's vibration absorbing so that this line isn't vibrating so hard that it's going to fatigue and break at any of the two connection points. All right, that's all there really is to setting this thing up on the engine. At that point, you're ready to start testing, get your fuel pump and filter assemblies in place, get the system primed out, and check for leaks. If you're going to have any leaks, I suspect it'll be at this connection point, this compression fitting right here on the pipe. Usually it's hard to judge just how tight to make that. You don't want to torque it so tight that the ferrule in there actually starts compressing that steel line down and reduces its diameter. So you go, until you're snug. Once you get to snug, you go a little past snug. Don't go too tight. Get everything assembled. Prime the system. Check for leaks. If you got a little bit of leak at that compression fitting, just go a little bit tighter. So let's go take a look at it on the actual engine, the running engine. This is the demo engine, and we can see how it operates. Okay, here we are. This is my test engine. This engine's actually being transplanted into an old 58 truck. So that's the reason why this thing is all minced up and chopped apart as you see it. I plan to do in another video all the steps I took to get the wiring all reconfigured in this thing so that we're down to just a simple flip switch for the run and the stop, and a push to start button, wait to start, check engine, all those sorts of things. So when we move this over into the older truck, it's all ready to go. I'm going to move the gauges over there, the gauge, parts of the gauges anyway, the individual gauges, not the whole cluster itself. Fuel pedal set up here on the fender. I've still got the batteries and things like that across the front. It was just easier to leave the fenders in place to do that. Anyway, for the rest of this video here, we're going to talk more about the fuel system. We have it mounted on this particular engine. You can see it down in there, back here with the fittings at the back of the head. Passenger side over here. Supply lines in from the front. Here is the gauge I put on the very top of this thing. Let's go ahead. I don't know how well the numbers show up, but give the old stop to run a real good flip. You can see, boom, we're right at 70 psi as soon as we flip that, and we're ready to start. Yeah, a little smoky coming out of there. I didn't tighten down the exhaust on there. This engine's getting ready to come out in another day. But there we go. That's the e-fuel system for the engine side. And you will be setting up your own pump and filter system. And I have just the standard Carter pump on there with the Napa Gold filters on either side, pre and post filters. Good luck.